Hey, welcome back to the Healthy Living Scottsdale podcast. I'm your host, Coach Zach. I'm here with Coach JC and Coach Caden. And today we are talking about balance and how to not train for it. But before we get into today's episode, we are going to give a shout out to Little Client of the Week. And Caden, this was your pick, so I'll let you go ahead.
So I want to give our client of the week shout out to Larry Torch.
Larry Torch.
I mean, when I first met him, I'm a real handful. That's how I'm going to say it. Real handful. First time I ever texted him too, I sent him a text. I'm like, Larry, I just want to let you know it's been great having you coming in the gym. And he goes, is it really? Question mark. Love the guy ever since. So I just want to say, Larry, man, I appreciate you coming in, giving me smiles, working hard, the occasional donut. Don't tell anyone else. And Larry, man, I appreciate you.
Larry Torch was a member here. Like he started here, or I guess came back here like right after I started training here, and he was like one of the first people that I worked with, and just he's fun to give a hard time to, but he is a phenomenal client. Like he's kind of everything that you want in a client, like not from a adherence standpoint, because he'll like argue with you and he'll come in and he'll be like, I'm only doing chest today or whatever, but then he'll do whatever you ask him to do. But he's just like, he really deeply understands and appreciates what it is that we do here. And there's something that goes, that goes a really long way from the coaching staff. Like we really appreciate that. So I know, like, I greatly appreciate Larry, and he's consistent, man. He shows up, he works hard, and everybody in the gym knows about it.
Yes.
All right, guys, let's talk about balance training. So I hear this quite a bit. People come in for consultations. We're sitting down, we're talking, what are your goals? What are you trying to accomplish? And a lot of times I need to work on my balance comes up in the conversation, right? You kind of get I want to lose weight, I want to tone up, I need to increase my energy, my flexibility, balance. That's probably like, fifth or sixth on the list of most common. And I think that there is just this Instagram perception of what it means to train for balance, right? And I think there's a big difference between, I think what people say they need is balance, but what they're actually kind of talking about is like stability, right? So, JC, what would you consider balance training? Or let me rephrase it. What would you not consider balance training?
I think the first thing that comes to mind when I think of balance training is just doing anything you can think of on top of like of an unstable surface, or
Bosu
ball, or an Airex pad, or something that's constantly moving, trying to throw you off center.
What are the boards with the
What are they, swivel boards? Is that what I think?
where you got the like foam roller in the center and then you're standing on the board?
I don't know what it's called.
I don't know what it's called either. but right, it's like standing on an unstable surface and doing anything, right? It could be bicep curls.
Yes.
So like what you're saying is that you can turn any exercise into a balance exercise simply by standing on an unstable surface.
Yeah, pretty much.
But is there any benefit to that?
I think there is a benefit to balance training, but that doesn't mean that you just throw yourself on top of a Bosu ball for every exercise and call it balance training. In my experience, like a lot of my experience comes from like PT. Like I worked at a physical therapy clinic for a long time, and like, of course, like balance, the Airex pads and the Bosu balls are just thrown around for every exercise. But there are certain scenarios where I do think it's beneficial to like the patient. Like if they, like we had a lot of people, they're older and they just came back from like a really bad fall at their home. So I think in that instance, it is important to train balance, but my first instinct would probably not to be to throw them on some kind of unstable surface that would just make them fall.
if somebody's unstable, it's probably not. It probably doesn't make sense to put them on an unstable
Yes,
surface.
that makes no sense.
Right.
whatsoever.
Caden, what would you consider, like, if somebody is like, hey, I need to improve my balance, what would you consider good training protocol for that?
Yeah, so I'm going to say good training protocol, it really is going to come down to, I'm going to say strength training, and I'm going to say specifically in a lot of like singular leg movements. So our clients listening just know we're hitting our balance training already. So
By default, it's already built in.
By default. So I'm going to say anytime you're strengthening a muscle, you're automatically going to generate better stability, better balance throughout the body anytime you're moving a weight in the weight room. So I'm going to say if I were to have a client that was like, hey, I want to get better on my balance, I would start taking them through like start off with a body weight single leg RDL would probably be the first move that I would take them through. See how their stability balance looks there, and then kind of adjust and come up with different movement patterns that they could hit on a singular leg to build up that balance.
I love that you said just like strength training, because there's a difference. I think there's a distinct difference between balance training and stability training. And when we're talking about balance training, it's like JC's saying, it's kind of like you're training for to be on an unstable surface. But the people that need that type of training, they're not surfing. They're not like walking on a like jumping up and down on a Bosu ball. They're just walking, right? They're just trying to go down the stairs or up a curb or something like that, and it's difficult for them. And so life isn't going to throw a Bosu ball like slide it under your foot, and you have to brace and be able to handle that. You need to be strong, right? And you need to have a lot of stability at your joints, especially your lower body, right? And so strength training is going to, and there's, kind of big complex movements that can increase overall strength, but then there's some more isolated movements that we can do to really target the musculature around a specific joint to strengthen that if there's an identified weakness there, right? And so if we're doing that, that is increasing your ability to balance, right?
Correct.
JC, would you say that, like, from a PT experience standpoint, like somebody comes in and they need to balance, like, what is a starting point for them? Is it just standing on one foot, like literally standing there and just lifting a foot off the ground?
It could be. You would be surprised how difficult that is for a lot of people. Now, obviously, like, it depends, but I'm trying to remember. So a lot of our, like, fall risk patients, which were normally older, or we had a lot of people with, like, really bad vertigo and their, like, vestibular is thrown off. So we would do a lot of balance stuff for them too. But it just depends on the individual. I had some people that didn't even have the strength to just stand there with one leg up in the air. So they would do either just like a really narrow, like they just stand with their feet together. So they have a much more narrow base to work from. And that was very hard for the individual. Or they can do a little bit of like a tandem stance where there's one foot like slightly in front of the other. So it's like a progression from that. And then maybe down the road, they're able to finally lift one leg up in the air. But it really just depends on the person, because some people just a single leg balance is super hard.
There's a population that applies to, but the majority of people that I would say from my experience that come in and say, I need to work on my balance, they're not falling into that category, right? Like they're not super old. They're not obese. They don't have comorbidities, right? They're not necessarily a fall risk. It's more of a, I guess, performance based thing, with at least with the majority of our clients. Now, like in a physical therapy setting, obviously that's a little bit different. But here, when somebody says like, we need balance training, like I need to work on my balance, what would you say, JC, is like the appropriate, I guess, perspective that they should have towards what they should be working on in order to improve their balance, either directly or indirectly?
I think balance and stability will be improved indirectly through whatever that we do here. But it's just getting them to understand, like we just said, like balance training is not just, oh, I stand here on one leg and like make sure that I don't fall. So like if we think of someone who, I don't know, has some kind of like ankle instability, or if they've had some kind of ankle issues, if they're coming in to like CPT, maybe me, I'm probably not going to throw them on something like unstable if they already feel unstable. So my approach would be just getting them strong, but that doesn't just mean like maximal strength strong. Some of it is just loading them, but it's also just loading them in various like positions and joint angles, so I can get them stronger in different positions. And I also want to work on things like speed, especially if we think about someone with an ankle injury or an older individual. If they're worried about, falling, then the first thing that comes to mind is working the foot at different speeds of movements, because the reason that they fall is because they're not fast enough to catch themselves from a fall. So I think just the overarching concepts would be like getting them stronger through different planes of movements and different joint angles and positions, but also just like different speeds. Like, can they do this slow? Great. Now can we like speed it up? Great. Now can we do this, not just forwards and backwards, but can we go like side to side and maybe like add some rotation to it? So that would be my approach.
I think I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think that's one of the most important elements of balance training, right, is the multiple planes of motion. Because day to day, like, people are moving forward, and that's pretty much it. Like, throughout their day, they're moving forward. They're not, like, how often do you walk backwards, right? Or how often just in your day-to-day life, going from your bed to the garage to the car to your office, like, how often do you move laterally? Like, take a step or a lunge laterally and then return to a starting position. And so for balance training, a lot of times it's just, hey, our body moves in a multiple of ways, and day to day you're only doing one of those. Let's go ahead and make sure that we become efficient at moving in multiple directions. And that way, if somebody bumps into you, right, like, you can quickly move your foot, plant, and it's like nothing ever happened, right? You watch somebody trip, and usually when it's a younger person, they trip and they just like catch themselves before they would ever fall and hit the ground. That's a really good indication of like, hey, you have pretty good balance and probably stability. You get to an older age, you can't do that, and you actually hit the ground, right? You fall and hit the ground. Now it's like, okay, that's where balance training is probably pretty appropriate for you, where maybe we need to focus on balance specifically, but as a general, like, overall fitness protocol, let's just train in multiple planes of motion and movement and exercises, and you're going to be balanced. Like, you're not going to have any issues. Would you guys agree with that? Or would you say, like, what would you say is the appropriate time or situation to then add unstable surfaces and things into somebody's training program? Is there a time and a place for that?
If it was for something very, very specific, like surfing, what was the example you had the other day?
Oh, yeah, I guess the two that we were talking about the other day was the PT clients, and then anybody that surfs, snowboards, skis, getting out there on the water. I'm going to say any like
action sports,
any board sports, action sports. I'd say that'd be a key time to like hone in on some balance training.
Then we can go ahead and throw a Bosu ball under them and have them leap from one Bosu ball to the other Bosu ball, 180 in the air, land, and, surf it, right?
3 sets of 10 and you're good.
Sounds a little irresponsible.
It does sound a little.
Don't do that, please.
Yeah, so we're joking, but that's probably what you would see like on Instagram or, some clown trainer where it's just super, super high risk, very low reward, and you could accomplish the same thing in a safe environment, right? And just by simply like throwing an unstable surface at somebody doesn't necessarily mean that it's better training, right? That's something that I would hope people would understand. This is kind of a common belief. I'll ask you guys, is there any evidence of like research done of, hey, if you're training on an unstable surface, your muscle fiber or motor recruitment is increased and therefore you are increasing your skeletal muscle mass, like working at a faster rate or burning more calories or anything like that?
I would assume there's more just like overall activity, just because you are working harder to keep yourself from not falling, but I don't see why that would increase muscle mass.
Yeah, I actually think it'll do the complete opposite. Like, let's take the Bosu ball and the curls for an example. As soon as you're on that Bosu ball, you're going to have to stabilize balance on your legs. You're going to have to stabilize your core. And that just means that not enough energy is going to be going into your biceps. So you're kind of, I'm going to say, focusing, I guess, more on the balance aspect over strength or muscle aspect at that point.
You're not going to be curling as heavy as you would if you were just standing on the ground doing a curl, focusing on the exercise.
Correct.
Right? So there might be some application where it's like if you're trying to get better at a sport where we're not necessarily focused on like the hypertrophy of the muscle. It's like, okay, yeah, we can maybe put you on an unstable surface, but it doesn't necessarily translate into more like increases in skeletal muscle mass or, an increase in the amount of calories you're burning or anything like that. So just wanted to make that point because there's, bro science out there. Now, as far as like motor recruitment of your nervous system, I haven't seen any research, but I would assume, like you said, JC, that your nervous system's having to work a little bit harder to stabilize. So it makes sense. Anytime you're doing multiple, things at once, your body has to work a little bit harder.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't look at that and again say that that's like good training, right? Like if you're training a professional athlete, their training's not going to be some sort of super fancy like exercise that incorporates all this different equipment all at the same time. It's really pretty much exactly how we train our clients here, with maybe some slight adjustments or increased demands, but it's not going to be, jumping up and down on a ball or an unstable surface and balancing on one leg and closing your eyes and, jumping and spinning and doing all of these things, right? Everything is in a very controlled environment. And if you just think about it like an elite athlete, their job is, or their goal, they're training for their goal is to be a better athlete and better at their sport. It's not to train, right? And so the training is the vehicle that they use. So we want the training to be in a very safe environment. So I wouldn't look at, even if you're researching some professional surfer, like, yeah, they're trying to get better at surfing. You're not going to see them, bouncing up and down on a trampoline with, on a trampoline on a stability ball, standing on a stability ball. So just guys, training for balance, again, multiple directions, training in multiple directions, and really focusing on strengthening the musculature around the joint to create more stability and protect you long term. Don't get caught up in all the fancy like social media minutia of what balance training is, because that's not the reality, right? So, all right, guys, that's all we got for you this week. We'll be back next week with more great stuff. Thank you so much for listening to the Healthy Living Scottsdale podcast. Do you have a question that you'd like for us to answer live on the podcast? If so, all you need to do is head over to the Apple Podcast app on your iPhone and do 3 simple things. First, leave us a rating and review telling me what you think of the podcast. In that review, ask anything you want related to health, fitness, or nutrition. And if you want a shout out, leave us your Instagram handle or name. That's all you have to do. Then listen to hear your questions answered live on the next Q&A episode.